Hey there, history lovers. Before we dive into today's journey through ancient Egypt, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our deep dives into the brutal realities of history. Trust me, after this video, you'll never look at those golden death masks the same way again. Now, I know what you're thinking. Being a pharaoh, that sounds amazing. Ultimate power, unlimited wealth, literal god status among your people. Sign me up. Yeah, Hollywood and those glossy history books have really done a number on you. They show you the gold, the monuments, the supposed glory, but they conveniently forget to mention the assassination attempts, the intestinal parasites, the political marriages to your own siblings, and the fact that your job description literally included dying to prove you're divine. So let's tear down those romantic notions, shall we? Because the reality of being an Egyptian pharaoh was less living God in paradise and more golden cage filled with people plotting your demise while you slowly succumb to diseases we can't even pronounce. And that's just scratching the surface, ready to find out why you absolutely positively wouldn't last a day as an Egyptian pharaoh. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, Your Divine Childhood, or How to Ruin a Kid Before They Turn 10. Let's start from the beginning. Your childhood. And I'm using that word loosely because, newsflash, Egyptian royal children didn't really have childhoods in any sense you'd recognize. You're born in the royal palace, probably in Memphis or Thebes, and from the moment you take your first breath, your life isn't your own. You're not just a baby. You're a potential future god king, a walking political asset, and a pawn in power struggles you won't understand for years. Your mother? She's not just your mum, she's the great royal wife, and her entire status depends on you surviving and potentially taking the throne. No pressure, tiny infant. Here's the thing nobody tells you about ancient Egyptian infant mortality. It was catastrophic. Even in the royal family with access to the best food and care available in the Bronze Age, you've got maybe a 50-50 shot of making it to age 5. Your siblings? Most of them won't survive. Diarrheal diseases, infections from minor cuts, fevers that spike and kill within days. These are just facts of life. And the medical care you receive? Oh boy. Egyptian physicians were actually quite advanced for their time, which is a polite way of saying they knew slightly more than nothing. They'll treat your childhood fevers with mixtures of honey, myrrh, and sometimes crocodile dung. Yes, you read that right. Crocodile dung. Applied topically or ingested, depending on your symptoms. Because when your civilization believes that disease is caused by malevolent spirits or the displeasure of gods, you get creative with cures. The palace nursery isn't the comforting soft space you might imagine. It's a stone chamber that gets uncomfortably cold at night and stifling hot during the day. Your cradle is wooden, your blankets are linen, and while that's luxurious by ancient standards, it's not exactly designed for infant comfort. The wet nurses assigned to you are carefully selected, but they're also monitored constantly because anyone with access to a royal infant could potentially harm or abduct you. Your wet nurse isn't chosen for her warmth or maternal instinct. She's chosen for her political reliability and health. She's from a family that owes everything to the throne. Her milk is tested on animals before you drink it. Her own children might be held as surety for her good behaviour. The bond that should form between infant and caregiver is tainted by paranoia and political calculation from day one. Let's say you survive those early years. Congratulations. Now your real education begins. And by education, I mean intensive indoctrination into the most complex theological political system in the ancient world. You need to learn hieroglyphics, and not just the basic stuff. We're talking thousands of characters representing sounds, words, and concepts. You'll spend hours every day practicing on pottery shards and limestone flakes because papyrus is too expensive to waste on a student, even a royal one. Your tutors, usually priests and scribes, don't believe in gentle encouragement. The ancient Egyptians literally had a saying, "A boy's ear is on his back, he listens when he is beaten." Physical punishment is considered essential to education. Make a mistake in your writing, that's a beating. Forget a religious formula. Beating. Show disrespect to your instructor. You better believe that's a beating. The physical punishments weren't just slaps on the wrist. We're talking about strikes with wooden rods that left bruises, sometimes drew blood, and definitely left lasting psychological scars. Your tutors believed that pain was the best teacher, and they applied this philosophy liberally. You learned to sit perfectly still for hours, to never cry out when struck, to suppress any emotional reaction to pain. This wasn't just education, it was systematic emotional suppression training. The educational sessions start before dawn and continue until dusk. You're maybe 6 or 7 years old, and your entire day is structured around learning. Writing practice, religious instruction, mathematics, history, diplomatic protocol, military theory. It's relentless. There's no time for play, no childhood friends to roughhouse with, no exploration or discovery, just endless drilling of information into your young mind, punctuated by punishment when you fail to meet expectations. But it gets worse. You're also learning to be a god, not metaphorically, literally. You need to memorize complex religious rituals, learn the names and attributes of hundreds of deities, understand your divine lineage, supposedly descending from Ra himself, and master the ceremonial performances that will define your reign. You're maybe 7 years old, and you're being taught that you're simultaneously a living god and a mortal who must perform divinity perfectly or risk cosmic catastrophe. The religious texts you're memorizing are in archaic language, filled with obscure references and theological complexities that adult scholars spend lifetimes studying. But you need to know them by heart, need to recite them without error during ceremonies, need to understand their deeper meanings. Mess up during a public ritual, and it's not just embarrassing, it's potentially catastrophic for Egypt's relationship with the divine realm. Your instructors tell you stories of pharaohs who failed in their divine duties and brought disaster upon Egypt. Failed floods, invasions, plagues, all blamed on the pharaoh's inadequate performance of rituals. These cautionary tales are designed to terrify you into perfect compliance, and they work. You develop nightmares about failing a ritual and causing cosmic catastrophe, about being responsible for the deaths of thousands. The psychological toll? Immense. You can't have normal friendships because you're divine and everyone else is inherently beneath you. Can't play freely because every action must reflect your status. Can't show weakness or fear because gods don't experience human frailty. You're being conditioned to suppress your humanity in favor of your role, and you haven't even hit puberty yet. The other children in the palace, children of nobles and officials, are brought in as your playmates, but the relationships are fundamentally unequal. They're taught to defer to you, to treat you as superior, to never challenge or contradict you. This means you never develop the social skills that come from genuine peer relationships. You don't learn how to compromise, how to resolve conflict among equals, how to form authentic friendships. Every relationship is hierarchical with you at the top, which sounds great until you realize how isolating and developmentally stunting that is. When you do interact with other children, it's stilted and artificial. They let you win at games. They laugh at your jokes even when they're not funny. They never disagree with you. You start to notice this and wonder if anyone actually likes you or if they're just performing deference. This awareness breeds a deep loneliness that follows you throughout your life. the knowledge that almost no one will ever treat you as a genuine equal. Speaking of which, let's talk about your living conditions. The palace is massive, sure, but comfort is relative. Those stone walls that look so impressive, they don't insulate. Egypt gets cold at night, especially in the winter months. You're sleeping on a bed that's essentially a wooden frame with woven reed matting. Better than most Egyptians, but not exactly a Tempur-Pedic. The pillows are wooden or stone headrests designed. Hey there, history lovers! Before we dive into today's journey through ancient Egypt, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our deep dives into the brutal realities of history. Trust me, after this video, you'll never look at those golden death masks the same way again. Now, I know what you're thinking. Being a pharaoh, that sounds amazing. Ultimate power, unlimited wealth, literal god status among your people. Sign me up. Yeah, Hollywood and those glossy history books have really done a number on you. They show you the gold, the monuments, the supposed glory. But they conveniently forget to mention the assassination attempts, the intestinal parasites, the political marriages to your own siblings, and the fact that your job description literally included dying to prove you're divine. So let's tear down those romantic notions, shall we? Because the reality of being an Egyptian pharaoh was less living God in paradise and more golden cage filled with people plotting your demise while you slowly succumb to diseases we can't even pronounce. And that's just scratching the surface, ready to find out why you absolutely positively wouldn't last a day as an Egyptian pharaoh. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, Your Divine Childhood, or How to Ruin a Kid Before They Turn 10. Let's start from the beginning. Your childhood. And I'm using that word loosely because, newsflash, Egyptian royal children didn't really have childhoods in any sense you'd recognize. You're born in the royal palace, probably in Memphis or Thebes, and from the moment you take your first breath, your life isn't your own. You're not just a baby. You're a potential future god king, a walking political asset, and a pawn in power struggles you won't understand for years. Your mother? She's not just your mum, she's the great royal wife, and her entire status depends on you surviving and potentially taking the throne. No pressure, tiny infant. Here's the thing nobody tells you about ancient Egyptian infant mortality. It was catastrophic. Even in the royal family with access to the best food and care available in the Bronze Age, you've got maybe a 50-50 shot of making it to age 5. Your siblings? Most of them won't survive. Diarrheal diseases, infections from minor cuts, fevers that spike and kill within days. These are just facts of life. And the medical care you receive? Oh boy. Egyptian physicians were actually quite advanced for their time, which is a polite way of saying they knew slightly more than nothing. They'll treat your childhood fevers with mixtures of honey, myrrh, and sometimes crocodile dung. Yes, you read that right. Crocodile dung, applied topically or ingested, depending on your symptoms. Because when your civilization believes that disease is caused by malevolent spirits or the displeasure of gods, you get creative with cures. The palace nursery isn't the comforting soft space you might imagine. It's a stone chamber that gets uncomfortably cold at night and stifling hot during the day. Your cradle is wooden, your blankets are linen, and while that's luxurious by ancient standards, it's not exactly designed for infant comfort. The wet nurses assigned to you are carefully selected, but they're also monitored constantly because anyone with access to a royal infant could potentially harm or abduct you. Your wet nurse isn't chosen for her warmth or maternal instinct. She's chosen for her political reliability and health. She's from a family that owes everything to the throne. Her milk is tested on animals before you drink it. Her own children might be held as surety for her good behaviour. The bond that should form between infant and caregiver is tainted by paranoia, and political calculation from day one. Let's say you survive those early years. Congratulations. Now your real education begins. And by education, I mean intensive indoctrination into the most complex theological political system in the ancient world. You need to learn hieroglyphics, and not just the basic stuff. We're talking thousands of characters representing sounds, words, and concepts. You'll spend hours every day practicing on pottery shards and limestone flakes because papyrus is too expensive to waste on a student, even a royal one. Your tutors, usually priests and scribes, don't believe in gentle encouragement. The ancient Egyptians literally had a saying, "A boy's ear is on his back, he listens when he is beaten." Physical punishment is considered essential to education. Make a mistake in your writing, that's a beating. Forget a religious formula. Beating. Show disrespect to your instructor. You better believe that's a beating. The physical punishments weren't just slaps on the wrist. We're talking about strikes with wooden rods that left bruises, sometimes drew blood, and definitely left lasting psychological scars. Your tutors believed that pain was the best teacher, and they applied this philosophy liberally. You learned to sit perfectly still for hours, to never cry out when struck, to suppress any emotional reaction to pain. This wasn't just education, it was systematic emotional suppression training. The educational sessions start before dawn and continue until dusk. You're maybe 6 or 7 years old, and your entire day is structured around learning. Writing practice, religious instruction, mathematics, history, diplomatic protocol, military theory. It's relentless. There's no time for play, no childhood friends to roughhouse with, no exploration or discovery. Just endless drilling of information into your young mind, punctuated by punishment when you fail to meet expectations. But it gets worse. You're also learning to be a god, not metaphorically, literally. You need to memorize complex religious rituals, learn the names and attributes of hundreds of deities, understand your divine lineage, supposedly descending from Ra himself, and master the ceremonial performances that will define your reign. You're maybe 7 years old, and you're being taught that you're simultaneously a living god and a mortal who must perform divinity perfectly or risk cosmic catastrophe. The religious texts you're memorizing are in archaic language, filled with obscure references and theological complexities that adult scholars spend lifetimes studying. But you need to know them by heart, need to recite them without error during ceremonies, need to understand their deeper meanings. Mess up during a public ritual, and it's not just embarrassing, it's potentially catastrophic for Egypt's relationship with the divine realm. Your instructors tell you stories of pharaohs who failed in their divine duties and brought disaster upon Egypt. Failed floods, invasions, plagues, all blamed on the pharaoh's inadequate performance of rituals. These cautionary tales are designed to terrify you into perfect compliance, and they work. You develop nightmares about failing a ritual and causing cosmic catastrophe, about being responsible for the deaths of thousands. The psychological toll? Immense. You can't have normal friendships because you're divine and everyone else is inherently beneath you. Can't play freely because every action must reflect your status. Can't show weakness or fear because gods don't experience human frailty. You're being conditioned to suppress your humanity in favor of your role, and you haven't even hit puberty yet. The other children in the palace, children of nobles and officials, are brought in as your playmates, but the relationships are fundamentally unequal. They're taught to defer to you, to treat you as superior, to never challenge or contradict you. This means you never develop the social skills that come from genuine peer relationships. You don't learn how to compromise, how to resolve conflict among equals, how to form authentic friendships. Every relationship is hierarchical with you at the top, which sounds great, until you realize how isolating and developmentally stunting that is. When you do interact with other children, it's stilted and artificial. They let you win at games. They laugh at your jokes even when they're not funny. They never disagree with you. You start to notice this and wonder if anyone actually likes you or if they're just performing deference. This awareness breeds a deep loneliness that follows you throughout your life, the knowledge that almost no one will ever treat you as a genuine equal. Speaking of which, let's talk about your living conditions. The pressure is absolutely crushing. You're a teenager dealing with all the normal hormonal chaos of adolescence, but you can't act out, can't rebel, can't even complain without risking your status or your life. Every facial expression is scrutinized. Every word is analyzed for meaning. You're living in a golden fishbowl where the fish are expected to be divine. Puberty is particularly difficult because your changing body is at odds with the timeless, perfect, divine image you're supposed to project. You're dealing with acne, body odor, menstruation for girls, voice changes for boys, growth spurts that make you clumsy, and all the physical awkwardness of adolescence. But you still need to perform divinity, still need to appear perfect and eternal and unchanging. The disconnect between your lived experience and expected performance is massive. The acne that crops up on your face is a source of shame and anxiety. Servants apply various cosmetics to conceal it, but you know it's there. You worry that people notice, that they see your physical imperfection and doubt your divinity. The priests assure you that such mortal afflictions don't undermine your divine nature, but you're not convinced. Every blemish feels like evidence of your fundamental fraud, that you're not really divine, just a flawed human playing dress-up. The sexual education you receive, if any, is purely functional. You need to understand the mechanics of producing heirs, but there's no discussion of pleasure, consent, or emotional connection. Sex is a duty, a political act, a means to continue the divine bloodline. Any romantic notions you might have are irrelevant to the reality of royal reproduction. If you're male, you're told that you'll need to produce many children with multiple wives to ensure the succession. The act is described in mechanical terms: insert, thrust, deposit seed, withdraw. There's no mention of intimacy, affection, or mutual pleasure. If you're female, you're told that submitting to your husband is a duty, that producing sons is your highest calling, that your own feelings about the act are irrelevant. You might develop romantic feelings for someone, a servant, a noble's daughter, someone you've interacted with. But pursuing those feelings is impossible or dangerous. Your romantic and sexual life will be determined by political necessity, not personal desire. This realization that you'll never have the freedom to love whom you choose is another loss in a childhood already full of losses. Chapter 2. Ascending the Throne, or congratulations, everyone wants you dead now. So your father dies. Maybe it was disease, maybe assassination, maybe just old age catching up with him. Doesn't matter. You're up. Time to become a living god. Exciting, right? Wrong. First, there's the funeral to endure. Egyptian royal funerals weren't quiet, dignified affairs. They were massive, months-long spectacles involving the mummification of your father's corpse, a process you might witness or at least smell from the palace. Elaborate rituals, processions, and ceremonies. You're expected to lead many of these while also projecting divine authority and showing appropriate grief. Thread that needle while dealing with your actual emotions about your father's death. The mummification process itself is nightmare fuel. Your father's body is taken to the Nefer, the House of Beauty, which is actually a house of controlled decay. The embalmers remove his brain through his nose with a hook, extract his internal organs, except the heart, and pack the body in natron salt for 40 days to dry it out. The smell permeating the area is indescribable. Rotting flesh mixed with the spices and resins used to mask the odor. And you, as the heir, are expected to participate in certain rituals during this process. You have to visit the embalming tent periodically to perform rituals. The smell hits you like a physical wall. The sweet, sick odor of decomposition barely masked by myrrh and frankincense. You see your father's body, unrecognizable and transformed, becoming something that's both him and not him. The psychological impact of watching your parent's corpse being systematically transformed is profound and traumatic. But you can't show that trauma. You perform the rituals, say the words, maintain the composure expected of a future god king. The embalmers work methodically, treating your father's body with professional detachment. They insert hooks into his nostrils and break through the ethmoid bone to access the brain, which they pull out in pieces. The sound alone is disturbing. The scraping and cracking of bone, the squelching of tissue. You witness this and must pretend it's normal, sacred even, when everything in you wants to flee from the horror of it. Your father's organs are removed through an incision in his side and placed in canopic jars, his liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines each going into separate vessels. Only the heart remains, as it will be needed for judgment in the afterlife. You watch as the embalmers pack the body cavity with natron and spices, literally salting your father's corpse like meat being preserved. The clinical efficiency of the process clashes with your emotional turmoil. But here's the real kicker. While all this is happening, the vultures are circling. And I don't mean the sacred birds, I mean the ambitious nobles, priests, and military commanders who see your father's death as an opportunity. You're young, maybe not even 20 yet. Some people think you're too inexperienced to rule. Others see you as a puppet they can control. Still others would prefer to see you removed entirely in favor of a more suitable candidate. The succession isn't always clear-cut. If you have older brothers who died young, or if there are questions about your mother's status, or if your father had multiple sons by different wives, the succession becomes contested. Factions form around different candidates. The military might prefer a more aggressive commander type. The priest might favor someone more devoted to religious duties. The bureaucrats might want someone they can influence. In the immediate aftermath of your father's death, before the funeral even begins, the political maneuvering intensifies. Officials who supported your father now need to declare loyalty to you, or shift allegiance to a rival. Provincial governors send messages gauging the political situation. Foreign powers wait to see if Egypt will be weakened by succession disputes. You're grieving your father while simultaneously fighting for your right to succeed him. Your mother, the great royal wife, becomes crucial in these moments. Her support legitimizes your claim, but she's also vulnerable. If you fail to secure the throne, she loses everything. Status, wealth, possibly her life. She works frantically behind the scenes, calling in favors, making promises, threatening those who might oppose you. You see her exhausted and desperate, and realize that your success or failure will determine her fate as well. Your coronation ceremony is incredibly complex. You're not just being crowned, you're being transformed from a human into a god through ritual. This involves multiple ceremonies over several days, including the said festival elements, where you must prove your divine vitality. You'll run a ritual course to demonstrate your strength, perform sacred rites in various temples, receive the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, which are heavy, uncomfortable, and hot, and make offerings to the gods who are now supposedly your divine family. The ritual run is particularly challenging. You need to demonstrate physical prowess by running between markers while carrying ritual objects. If you're not particularly athletic, or if you're ill, or if you're just exhausted from days of ceremonies, this becomes genuinely difficult. But stumbling or showing fatigue is interpreted as a bad sign. Maybe the gods don't approve of you. Maybe you're not physically fit to rule. The pressure to perform perfectly despite exhaustion is enormous. You're carrying a flail and crook, the symbols of pharaonic authority, while running this course. They're heavier than they look, and maintaining your grip while running at ceremonial pace, faster than walking but not quite sprinting, requires concentration. The sand shifts under your feet. The sun beats down. Thousands of observers watch silently, judging every aspect of your performance. Your lungs burn, your legs ache, but you can't show it. The crowns themselves are torture devices masquerading as regalia. The white crown of Upper Egypt is tall and conical, sitting uncomfortably on your head and making your neck ache after just minutes. The red crown of Lower Egypt is better balanced but still heavy. When you wear the double crown, Shent, combining both, your neck muscles are screaming within an hour, and you'll wear these for extended ceremonies, sometimes lasting all day in the blazing Egyptian sun. The weight distribution is terrible. The crowns weren't designed with comfort in mind. They were designed to look impressive and symbolize power. They shift on your head, requiring constant micro-adjustments to keep them stable. The headaches they cause are severe. After a full day of ceremonies, your neck is so stiff and painful that turning your head is agony. But you endure, because removing the crown prematurely would be unthinkable. The double crown is especially unwieldy. It combines the height of the white crown with the projection of the red crown, creating a top-heavy structure that constantly threatens to tip. You learn to move your entire upper body rather than just your head to avoid dislodging it. The muscles in your neck and upper back develop from constantly supporting this weight, but they also remain chronically tight and painful. Now, you're Pharaoh, the living Horus, the son of Ra, the lord of the two lands. Sounds impressive until you realize what that actually means day to day. Your first challenge, establishing authority. You're surrounded by people who were adults when you were born, who have more experience in governance, military matters, and religious affairs than you'll accumulate in years. They're watching you, testing you, looking for any sign of weakness. Make the wrong decision early, show uncertainty, or fail to project confidence, and you'll be a puppet ruler with others pulling the strings. The testing is constant and subtle. An advisor presents you with a problem that has no good solution, watching to see how you handle it. A general delays following an order, seeing if you'll enforce your authority or let it slide. A priest subtly challenges your interpretation of a ritual, checking if you'll defend your position or defer to religious authority. Every interaction is a small power struggle, and losing too many of them means losing control of your kingdom. Your vizier, supposedly your most trusted advisor, presents a situation where two provincial governors are feuding over water rights. Both have valid claims, both have powerful supporters at court. Whatever you decide will create an enemy. He watches to see if you'll make a decision or try to avoid it, if you'll stand by your judgment or reverse it when pressured. This is a test, and you know it, but that doesn't make the decision any easier. The administrative demands are crushing. Egypt isn't some small kingdom. It's a vast territorial state stretching from Nubia in the south to the Levant in the north, depending on the dynasty. You're responsible for managing irrigation systems that millions depend on for survival, coordinating grain storage for times of famine, overseeing massive construction projects, directing military campaigns, conducting diplomatic relations with foreign powers, and serving as the supreme judge for major legal cases. The irrigation system alone is mind-bogglingly complex. The Nile's annual flood is predictable in general, but variable in specifics. You need a network of canals, dikes, and basins to distribute water efficiently. Maintenance is constant. Canals silt up, dikes erode, disputes arise over water rights. Provincial governors send reports on local irrigation issues. and you need to make decisions about resource allocation for repairs and improvements. Get it wrong, and crops fail, people starve, and your reign is remembered as a disaster. The reports come in constantly. The canal at the Third Cataract requires dredging. Farmers in the delta dispute the water allocation from the new basin. The dike at Memphis shows structural weakness and may fail during the next flood. Each issue requires a decision: allocate resources, adjudicate disputes, prioritize repairs. There are never enough resources to address everything, so you're constantly deciding what gets fixed and what gets deferred, knowing that the wrong choice could lead to catastrophe. And you can't just delegate everything, because that's how you lose power. You need to be directly involved enough to maintain control, but not so micromanaging that you can't handle the workload. It's an impossible balance, and the consequences of failure are catastrophic, not just for you, but potentially for the entire kingdom. The daily decision-making is exhausting. Should you approve the construction of a new temple, or allocate those resources to military expansion? Should you show mercy to a rebellious province, or make an example of them? Should you promote the capable but politically unreliable general, or the loyal but mediocre one? Each decision affects thousands of lives and sets precedents for future situations. You approve a temple construction, and the military commanders grumble about insufficient support for their forces. You fund a military campaign, and the priest complain that you're neglecting the gods. You try to split resources evenly, and both factions accuse you of weakness and indecision. There's no winning, only the least bad option among bad choices. Let's talk about your daily schedule, because Pharaoh isn't a 9-to-5 job. You wake before dawn. Sleeping in is for commoners, because you need to perform the morning rituals. As Pharaoh, you're the high priest of every temple in Egypt, though in practice you have deputies. But for major rituals, especially in the most important temples, you need to be there personally. The morning ritual at the temple involves waking the god, represented by their cult statue, bathing them, dressing them, offering them food, and performing various prayers and ceremonies. This requires you to be ritually pure, which means you've bathed in cold water, shaved your entire body, yes, entire, and put on fresh linen garments. In winter, this is miserable. In summer, you'll be sweating through those linens within minutes of putting them on. The cold water bathing in winter is genuinely unpleasant. You're standing in a stone chamber while servants pour jar after jar of cold water over you. Your skin prickles with goosebumps, your teeth chatter, and you're supposed to maintain dignity and composure. The full body shaving with bronze razors is uncomfortable and sometimes painful. The razors aren't particularly sharp by modern standards, and nicks and cuts are common. The servants use a scraping technique with the bronze razors, pulling the blade across your skin at an angle to cut the hair. Your scalp, face, chest, legs, groin. Everything must be hairless to be ritually pure. The process takes a significant amount of time, and mistakes leave cuts that sting when you bathe. Small infections sometimes develop in the nicks, adding another source of discomfort to your daily existence. After the morning rituals, you have administrative duties. Audiences with officials, reviewing reports from provincial governors, making decisions about resource allocation, hearing petitions, because you're supposed to be accessible to your subjects, at least in theory, and dealing with the endless political maneuvering of your court. The bureaucracy is mind-numbing. Everything is recorded on papyrus in hieratic script, a cursive form of hieroglyphics. Reports come in about grain yields, tax collections, military readiness, construction progress, foreign relations, legal disputes, and 1,000 other matters. You need to process this information, make informed decisions, and ensure your orders are executed. Mess up, and people starve, buildings collapse, or enemies invade. Reading the reports is genuinely tedious. Provincial governors use flowery, formal language filled with honorifics and elaborate descriptions. You need to extract the actual information from pages of bureaucratic prose. Some reports are deliberately obscure, hiding bad news or failures behind careful wording. You need to read between the lines, ask follow-up questions, and verify information through multiple sources. It's like being an accountant, detective, and manager all at once. A governor reports, "The harvest was adequate to the needs of the province, though the benevolence of the divine son of Ra might consider that additional supplies would enable celebration of festivals befitting the god's glory." Translation: the harvest failed, they don't have enough food, and they're asking for aid while trying not to admit failure. You need to decode this diplomatic language constantly, figure out what's really being said beneath the elaborate courtesy. Then there's the military aspect of your role. As Pharaoh, you're the supreme military commander. You're expected to lead armies personally, especially during major campaigns. This isn't symbolic leadership. You're supposed to fight to demonstrate your divine strength by smiting Egypt's enemies. Never mind that you've been raised in a palace and might have limited actual combat experience. You're a god king, so obviously you're a superior warrior. The reality of ancient warfare is terrifying. Bronze Age combat was close, personal, and brutal. Swords, spears, axes, clubs, all designed to hack, stab, and bludgeon human bodies. Arrowheads that could punch through leather armor. Chariots that could crush fallen soldiers under their wheels. The noise, the blood, the screaming, the chaos. It's sensory overload of the worst kind. Your first real battle is a shock to the system, unlike anything your sheltered upbringing prepared you for. The sound alone is overwhelming. Thousands of men shouting, screaming, the clash of bronze on bronze, the thunder of chariot wheels, the whistle of arrows. The smell of blood, sweat, and fear is thick in the air. You see men die in front of you, heads split open, guts spilling, limbs severed. The visceral reality of violence is nothing like the sanitized depictions in art. An arrow hits the man next to you in the throat. He makes a choking, gurgling sound as blood fountains from the wound. He falls, clutching at his neck, eyes wide with shock and fear. You watch him die in seconds, and there's nothing you can do. Then another arrow whistles past your head, and you realize that divine status doesn't actually protect you from very physical threats. And you can't show fear. You're divine. You're supposed to wade into battle like it's nothing, trusting that your divine nature will protect you. Except it won't, necessarily. Plenty of pharaohs died in battle or from battle injuries. Seqenenre-Tao got his skull caved in by multiple axe blows. We have his mummy, and the injuries are horrific. Tutankhamun might have died from complications of a chariot accident. Being divine doesn't make you bulletproof, or arrowproof in this case. The chariot warfare requires specific skills you might not have fully mastered. You need to control horses while shooting a bow or wielding weapons, maintain your balance on a moving platform, coordinate with your chariot driver, and make tactical decisions in the chaos of battle. It's physically demanding and mentally exhausting. One mistake, and you could be thrown from the chariot, trampled or killed. The chariot floor is just woven leather or wood straps stretched over a frame, providing minimal stability. The platform bounces and sways with every movement of the horses and every irregularity in the terrain. You're trying to maintain your balance while drawing a bow that requires significant strength to pull, aiming at moving targets and avoiding incoming projectiles. It requires skills that take years to master, and mistakes are immediately punished. You see a chariot hit a rock and overturn, throwing both occupants. The horses drag the wrecked vehicle across the battlefield, panicked and uncontrollable. Enemy soldiers swarm the fallen warriors, hacking them to pieces. You realize that could easily be you. One wrong decision by your driver, One unseen obstacle, one unlucky moment, and you're dead regardless of your divine status. After battle, there's the aftermath to deal with. The wounded need care, your own troops and decisions about enemy wounded. The dead need disposal, both ritual burial for Egyptians and dealing with enemy corpses. Prisoners need to be processed. The smell of a battlefield after combat is horrific. Blood, released bowels, the beginning of decay in the heat. You might need to remain on the battlefield for ceremonies celebrating victory, surrounded by this carnage, projecting divine triumph while fighting nausea. The battlefield in the Egyptian heat becomes a charnel house within hours. Bodies bloat and burst. Flies swarm in clouds so thick they seem like smoke. The smell is beyond description. Metallic blood mixed with a stench of ruptured intestines and the sickly sweet smell of early decomposition. You need to tour the battlefield, inspecting the dead, confirming the victory, while breathing through your mouth to avoid vomiting from the smell. Your troops expect you to acknowledge their victory, to share in the celebration. They're euphoric, having survived battle and defeated the enemy. They chant your name, proclaim your divine might, celebrate the slaughter. You're supposed to share their joy, to revel in the victory. But you're traumatized, exhausted, and nauseated. You perform enthusiasm while internally recoiling from the horror you've witnessed and participated in. Chapter 3. The Palace of Plots, or Your Home is Actually a Viper Pit. Let's talk about where you live, because the palace is central to understanding why your life is a nightmare wrapped in gold leaf. The royal palace is enormous, a sprawling complex of audience halls, private quarters, administrative buildings, temples, gardens, workshops and storehouses. Thousands of people live and work here. Family members, servants, officials, craftsmen, guards, priests. It's a city within a city, and you're at the centre of it, like a spider in a very elaborate, very dangerous web. Your private quarters are luxurious by ancient standards. Painted walls depicting scenes of nature and the gods. Fine furniture crafted from imported wood. The best textiles available. But luxury doesn't mean comfort or safety. Those walls are thick mud brick covered in plaster. Great for insulation in some ways, terrible in others. When the Nile floods and humidity soars, everything feels damp and gets mouldy. When it's dry season, dust gets into everything, your clothes, your food, your lungs. The painted plaster on the walls is beautiful, but requires constant maintenance. The humidity causes paint to flake and peel. Insects burrow into the mud brick beneath, creating small holes and galleries. The servants are constantly repainting, replastering and repairing, but decay is always one step ahead of maintenance. Even the Pharaoh's private chambers show signs of deterioration. You watch as workers chip away flaking paint and apply fresh plaster. The room is disrupted, filled with dust and the smell of wet plaster. Your possessions are moved and covered. You're displaced from your own chambers for the repairs, and you know that in a few months or years, the process will repeat. Nothing is permanent, nothing lasts. Even the palace that symbolizes eternal power is constantly crumbling and being rebuilt. The palace has minimal privacy. You're constantly surrounded by servants, attendants, bodyguards, officials. They see you wake up, watch you eat, observe you bathing. Someone has to pour the water. Accompany you to the bathroom facilities, which are just slightly more sophisticated than a hole in the ground with a wooden seat. The concept of being alone rarely exists for you. Even your most intimate moments are observed. The attendant who helps you dress knows every mark on your body. The servants who change your bedding see the evidence of your nocturnal activities. The physicians who examine you know your every physical ailment. There's no aspect of your life that remains private, and this constant observation is psychologically wearing. you develop a strange relationship with your body. It's both yours and not yours. It belongs to Egypt, to your role, to history. Your body is examined, discussed, evaluated by others. Its functions and failures are matters of state interest. You start to feel disconnected from it, treating it almost like a tool that you use rather than an integral part of yourself. And all these people, any one of them could be plotting against you. That servant who brings your food could be poisoning it slowly. That trusted advisor could be in secret communication with your rivals. That bodyguard standing behind you could have been bribed to look the other way during an assassination attempt. Paranoia isn't a character flaw when you're Pharaoh. It's a survival skill. The harem is another source of constant intrigue and danger. Your father probably had dozens of wives and concubines, and you're expected to maintain or expand that number. These women aren't just for your personal pleasure. They're diplomatic assets. Foreign princesses married for alliances. Political necessities. Egyptian noblewomen wed to secure powerful families' loyalty. And baby-making machines. You need heirs, preferably several as backup. The harem politics are Byzantine in their complexity. Each wife has her own household, her own servants, her own faction of supporters. They compete for your favor, for resources, for status. A wife who produces a son gains influence. One whose son is named heir becomes incredibly powerful. The competition is fierce and sometimes deadly. You visit the harem to fulfill your duty of producing heirs. The atmosphere is thick with tension and competition. The women are elaborately dressed and made up, performing charm and desirability. But beneath the surface, you sense the desperation and calculation. They're competing for your attention because their status and security depend on it. The interactions feel performative and transactional rather than genuinely intimate. But here's the problem. Each of these women has her own agenda. They want their sons to inherit the throne. They want status and privilege. They form factions, alliances, and plots. The harem conspiracy against Ramesses III was a real thing. Multiple wives and officials plotted to kill him and install one woman's son as pharaoh. They failed, but it shows how dangerous your own household is. The conspiracy involved poisoning, magic spells, which they genuinely believed would work, and plans for assassination. The plotters were caught and executed, but it demonstrates that nowhere is safe. Your own wives, the women you sleep with, the mothers of your children, they might be planning your death. Trust becomes almost impossible. The trial records from the harem conspiracy are chilling. Multiple wives coordinated with palace officials to kill Ramesses III. They created wax figurines for magical attacks, obtained poisons, and recruited accomplices. The conspiracy only failed because someone informed on the plotters. You read these records and realized that similar plots might be forming around you right now, and you might not have a loyal informant to warn you. Your great royal wife has the most status, but also faces the most pressure. She needs to produce a male heir, preferably multiple male heirs. If she can't, or if her sons die, remember that infant mortality rate, her position becomes precarious. Other wives might see an opportunity to elevate their own sons. The great royal wife might become desperate, leading to plots against rival children, or even against you if she thinks you might set her aside. The desperation of a great royal wife who fails to produce viable heirs is palpable. She might turn to magic, to prayers and offerings at temples, to questionable medical treatments. She might plot against rival wives and their children, using poison or hired agents. The stakes for her are existential. Lose her position and she becomes irrelevant, possibly even dangerous enough to eliminate. Her fear makes her dangerous to everyone around her, including you. You notice your great royal wife becoming increasingly anxious and controlling. She questions you about your visits to other wives. monitors which children you show favour to, makes offerings at temples known for fertility assistance. Her desperation is evident, and you know that desperate people take desperate actions. You begin to wonder if she might harm you or your other children to protect her own position. The succession question haunts every moment. Who will succeed you? If you have multiple sons, which one? The eldest by the great royal wife is traditional, but what if he's sickly, incompetent, or unpopular? What if a younger son seems more capable? What if a son by a lesser wife has stronger support from important factions? Every choice you make, or fail to make, creates winners and losers, allies and enemies. The sons themselves are raised in competition with each other. They're taught statecraft, warfare and religious duties, but they're also learning to see each other as rivals. Brothers who should be close instead view each other as obstacles to power. You try to keep them from open conflict, but the tension is always there. History is full of brothers who killed each other for the throne. You watch your sons interact at a palace ceremony. The eldest performs his ritual role perfectly, aware that everyone is evaluating him as future pharaoh. The second son watches with barely concealed resentment, knowing that only his brother's death or failure stands between him and supreme power. The younger sons form alliances with courtiers, building power bases against the day they might need them. Your children can't be brothers in any meaningful sense because they're rivals in a zero-sum game for the throne. Your children aren't raised by you in any meaningful sense. They have nursemaids, tutors, and attendants. You see them during formal occasions and important rituals, but daily parenting? That's not a pharaoh's job. This emotional distance is both a cultural norm and a psychological defense mechanism. You can't afford to get too attached when many of them won't survive to adulthood, and when some of the survivors might become rivals or threats. You know your children's names and can recognize them, but you don't know their personalities, their fears, their dreams. They're strangers who happen to share your blood. When one dies, you're expected to grieve publicly, but the private grief is complicated by the lack of real relationship. When one shows promise, you're pleased but also wary. A capable son might become impatient for power. A messenger informs you that your youngest daughter has died of fever. You feel something. Sadness, certainly, but also a detachment. You saw her perhaps a dozen times in her short life, always in formal settings. You know her name, her age, who her mother was, but you don't know her. The grief you perform publicly is partly genuine, partly theatrical. You wonder if you're a monster for not feeling more, but the system that made you pharaoh also made genuine paternal bonds nearly impossible. The political factions within the palace are labyrinthine. There's the military faction, led by generals who want aggressive foreign policy and military expansion. The priestly faction, centered around the high priests of Amun, the most powerful religious position besides yours, who want resources funneled to temple construction and religious institutions. The administrative faction, composed of viziers and high officials, who prioritize stable governance and infrastructure. Noble families jockeying for positions and privileges. Foreign elements, diplomats, hostages and merchants pursuing their own kingdoms, interests. You need to balance all these interests without letting any faction become powerful enough to threaten you. Give the military too much, and they might stage a coup. Favor the priests too heavily, and they start thinking they speak for the gods more than you do. Rely too much on bureaucrats, and you lose the warrior mystique that helps legitimize your rule. It's an endless juggling act. The factional maneuvering is constant. Military commanders request resources for campaigns that might benefit Egypt or might just enhance their own prestige. Priests demand funding for temple expansions that glorify the gods or line their own pockets. Bureaucrats propose administrative reforms that might improve efficiency or might consolidate their own power. every request has surface justifications and hidden agendas. Your vizier proposes a reorganization of provincial administration that he claims will improve tax collection efficiency, but you notice it would also place several provinces under governors loyal to him personally. The military commander requests funding for new chariot divisions, ostensibly to counter Hittite threats, but you suspect he wants to build a personal army. The High Priest of Amun suggests a massive temple expansion that would employ thousands of workers and craftsmen, buying enormous popular support for the priesthood. Meals are another minefield. Yes, you eat the finest food in Egypt: roasted duck, fresh fish from the Nile, honey-sweetened cakes, the best fruits and vegetables, the finest beer and wine. But every bite could be your last. Food tasters are standard, but they're not foolproof. Slow-acting poisons could kill you days after consumption, making it impossible to trace the source. Some poisons mimic natural diseases, providing perfect cover for murder. The kitchens are supposed to be secure, but they're staffed by dozens of people, all of whom have access to your food at various stages of preparation. All it takes is one bribed cook, one disgruntled servant, one agent of a foreign power or domestic rival. You can never fully relax during a meal. You watch your food taster consume portions of your meal and wait to see if they show signs of poisoning. But this delay means your food is often lukewarm by the time you eat it, and you know the taster might die to prove your food was poisoned. Their life is the price of your security. Some tasters do die, confirming assassination attempts and creating fear even when you survive. The taster once collapsed mid-meal, clutching his throat and vomiting blood. The servants rushed him away while you sat frozen, staring at your plate. Someone had poisoned your food. Someone in your household, someone with access to the kitchens, someone you probably interacted with regularly. The investigation found nothing conclusive. The would-be assassin was never identified. You eat the next meal wondering if this time the poison will get through the taster. Even your entertainment is complicated. Musicians, dancers, and performers are brought in to amuse you during banquets, but they might also be intelligence gatherers, observing your behavior and reporting to various factions. That beautiful dancer could be an assassin. Those acrobats, potential spies. Everyone is potentially dual purpose. The entertainment itself is genuinely enjoyable. Skilled musicians playing harps and flutes, dancers moving with incredible grace, acrobats performing feats that astound. But you can never fully lose yourself in the performance. You're always aware of being watched, always analysing the performers for threats, always conscious that this moment of leisure is also a vulnerability. A new dancer is introduced to the court, a woman of extraordinary beauty and skill. She performs with a grace that captivates everyone. You find yourself genuinely entertained, almost forgetting your usual vigilance. Then you notice her eyes scanning the room between movements, her attention lingering on the guards' positions, the exits, the dais where you sit. Maybe she's just nervous. Maybe she's memorizing the palace layout for someone else. You can never know for certain, so you can never fully trust or enjoy. Your sleeping arrangements are particularly vulnerable. Sleep is when humans are most defenseless, and you're no exception despite your divine status. Your bedchamber is guarded, but guards can be compromised. You probably have a trusted attendant who sleeps in the room or nearby, but trust is always relative. Some pharaohs developed such paranoia that they changed sleeping locations unpredictably, or used body doubles. The fear of assassination while sleeping is rational and well-founded. History records pharaohs killed in their beds. You might employ multiple guards, have complicated entry procedures, even sleep with weapons within reach. But ultimately, sleep requires vulnerability. You have to close your eyes, lose consciousness, trust that you'll wake up. That trust is tested every night. You sometimes wake in the darkness, heart pounding, certain you heard something. Was it a footstep, a whisper, the sound of a weapon being drawn? You lie still, straining to hear over your own rapid breathing. The guard outside your door is silent. The attendant in the adjacent chamber doesn't stir. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a dream. Or maybe someone was there and retreated when you woke. You lie awake for hours, unable to return to sleep, exhausted but too paranoid to let your guard down. The palace architecture includes secret passages, hidden entrances, and security features designed to protect you, but these same features could be used against you by someone who knows them. The complexity that's meant to provide security also creates opportunities for betrayal. Every passage, every hidden door, every secret route is a potential vulnerability if the wrong person learns about it. You discover a hidden passage in your chambers that you weren't aware of. How many people know about it? Who has access? Could someone enter your private rooms without going through the guarded doors? You order it sealed, but then you wonder how many other passages you don't know about exist. The palace that should be your fortress feels increasingly like a trap, with exits and entrances you can't control. Chapter 4. Divine Duties and Religious Theatre, or Fake It Till You Make It, Forever. Now let's discuss the religious obligations that dominate your existence, because being a living god is a full-time job with no days off, no vacation, and no retirement plan except death. The Egyptian religious system is staggeringly complex. Hundreds of gods and goddesses, each with their own cult centers, festivals, rituals, and theological significance. As Pharaoh, you're not just the high priest of all these cults. You're supposed to be the sole intermediary between the divine realm and the human world. No pressure, right? The theology of kingship puts you in an impossible position. You're simultaneously fully divine, the living Horus, the son of Ra, and fully human, a mortal who needs to eat, sleep, and will eventually die. You need to perform divinity perfectly while inhabiting a human body with all its limitations and weaknesses. It's a contradiction you can never resolve, only perform. This dual nature creates constant cognitive dissonance. When you're hungry, tired, or in pain, you're acutely aware of your humanity. But you need to act as if these mortal limitations don't affect you. When you make mistakes or misjudgments, you know you're fallible, but you need to project divine omniscience. The gap between what you are and what you're supposed to be is a source of constant psychological stress. You stand in front of your mirror, a polished bronze plate, and see your reflection, tired eyes, the beginnings of wrinkles, scars from battle, the telltale signs of age and mortality. But when you emerge into public, you become the timeless, perfect, divine king. The transformation feels like putting on a mask, but the mask can never come off. You sometimes wonder which is real, the exhausted mortal in the mirror, or the divine king in the temple. Temple rituals dominate your schedule. The daily ritual I mentioned earlier is just the start. There are monthly festivals, seasonal celebrations, special occasions tied to agricultural cycles, coronation anniversaries, and countless other ceremonial events. For major festivals, you might spend days performing elaborate rituals, wearing increasingly uncomfortable costumes and regalia, making offerings, reciting prayers, and participating in processions. The Opet Festival, for example, was one of the most important celebrations in Thebes. It lasted for weeks and involved transporting the cult statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu from Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple in a massive procession. You, as Pharaoh, led this procession, which meant walking or being carried in a palanquin through crowds of thousands in the Egyptian heat, maintaining perfect divine composure the entire time. The procession is grueling. The distance between Karnak and Luxor is about 2 miles, which doesn't sound like much until you're doing it in full regalia, moving slowly in ceremonial pace, stopping for rituals along the way. The crowds press in, everyone trying to get a glimpse of their god-king. The noise is overwhelming, chanting, music, thousands of voices. The heat is intense, and you need to maintain perfect composure and dignity for hours. The crowds reach out to touch you, to get closer to divinity. The guards push them back, but hands still, grab at your palanquin, at the fabric of your garments. People weep and prostrate themselves as you pass. Some call out prayers or petitions. The sheer intensity of their faith in you is both humbling and terrifying. What if you're not what they believe you to be? What if you fail them? The weight of their expectations is crushing. During these festivals, you're on display. The people need to see their God-King, magnificent and powerful, confirming their faith in the divine order. You can't look tired, sick, or weak. Can't stumble or make mistakes in the rituals. Can't show that you're human. The crown is heavy. Your feet are killing you. You're dehydrated and overheated. Maybe you're fighting off some illness, but none of that can show. The performance must be flawless. The ritual purity requirements are exhausting. Before major ceremonies, you need to purify yourself through bathing, shaving, fasting, and abstaining from various activities. Different rituals have different purity requirements. Some demand days of preparation. This constant cycle of purification and ritual performance wears you down physically and mentally. The fasting before major rituals leaves you lightheaded and weak, precisely when you need to perform lengthy ceremonies. The purification restrictions might prohibit sexual activity for days or weeks, creating tension in your relationships and making the already difficult job of producing heirs even more complicated. The constant bathing and shaving irritate your skin, leaving it raw and sensitive. You're 3 days into a purification fast before a major ceremony. You're desperately hungry, weakened by the lack of food. But today, you need to perform a lengthy ritual that requires standing, kneeling, and making precise gestures for hours. The hunger gnaws at you. Your hands shake slightly. Your concentration wavers. But the ritual must be performed perfectly, because the gods are watching, and Egypt depends on your correct execution of these sacred duties. The texts you need to memorize and recite are vast. Hymns, prayers, offering formulas, theological declarations, all in formal, archaic language that's different from everyday speech. Mess up, and you're not just making an embarrassing mistake, you're potentially disrupting the cosmic order. The priests and educated observers will notice any error. The people might interpret it as a bad omen. Some of these texts are incredibly long and complex. The pyramid texts, for example, contain hundreds of spells and utterances. You need to know which texts apply to which rituals, when to recite them, in what order, with what gestures and offerings. The mental effort of keeping all this straight is enormous, especially when you're also managing political, military, and administrative duties. You're halfway through a complex ritual recitation when your mind goes blank. You've lost your place in the text. The words that should come next simply aren't there in your memory. The priests are watching, the silence stretches, panic rises in your throat, then the words come back and you continue, but you're shaken. You made a mistake, however brief. Did anyone notice? Will the gods punish this lapse? You complete the ritual mechanically, your confidence shattered. Temple construction is another massive religious obligation. You're expected to build or expand temples to honor the gods and demonstrate your piety. This means diverting enormous resources, labor, materials, skilled craftsmen, precious metals and stones to construction projects that might take decades to complete. You need to personally participate in foundation ceremonies, inspect progress, and make offerings at various stages. But here's the catch. Temple construction is also a political tool. Building a grand temple to Amun keeps the Amun priesthood happy and demonstrates your devotion to Egypt's chief god. Constructing temples in newly conquered territories asserts Egyptian control and divine approval of your expansion. Restoring old temples gains favor with conservative religious factions. Every building decision has political ramifications. The foundation ceremonies require you to perform rituals at the construction site, sometimes in remote locations, always in public view. You might need to lay foundation deposits, ritual objects buried to consecrate the site, perform symbolic groundbreaking, or make offerings to local deities. These ceremonies can last hours in whatever weather conditions exist at the time. You travel to a remote quarry site for a foundation ceremony. The journey takes days. When you arrive, you must perform elaborate rituals in the full sun with no shade. Sand blows in your eyes. The heat is oppressive. The local population has gathered to witness their god-king consecrate this site. You perform for hours, your lips cracking from dehydration, your skin burning despite the oils applied by servants, but you maintain perfect composure because that's what gods do. The economic power of temples is staggering. Major temples owned vast estates, employed thousands of workers, controlled huge amounts of wealth, and wielded significant political influence. The high priest of Amun at Karnak was effectively the second most powerful person in Egypt during some periods. These religious institutions can be your greatest allies or most dangerous rivals, depending on your relationship with them. Temple estates included farms, workshops, mines, and trading operations. The temples had their own administrative bureaucracies, essentially functioning as economic entities within the state. The wealth they controlled was supposed to serve the gods, but it also gave priests enormous secular power. They could fund political activities, support or oppose your policies, and even field military forces if things came to open conflict. You receive reports that the Temple of Amun now controls a third of Egypt's agricultural land. The high priest commands resources that rival your own treasury. He has his own administration, his own military force for temple security, his own diplomatic relations with foreign temples. You realize that the priesthood is becoming a state within the state, and the high priest might be more powerful than you in practical terms, even if theoretically subordinate. You need to manage this relationship carefully. Show too much deference to the priests, and they start making demands, expecting resources and privileges that drain the royal treasury and undermine your authority. Show too little respect, and they can turn the people against you by suggesting you've angered the gods. They control much of the religious narrative that legitimizes your rule, so they have leverage over you. The oracle system gives priests another power lever. Major temples had oracles, supposed direct communications from the gods in response to questions. The priests operated these oracles, and while you're theoretically the ultimate religious authority, contradicting a divine oracle is politically dangerous. Smart priests could manipulate oracles to advance their agendas while maintaining plausible deniability. Oracle consultations involve presenting questions to the god via their statue, and the god would answer through the statue moving or other signs interpreted by priests. In practice, the priest carrying the statue or interpreting the signs determined the answer. If the oracle declared that the gods favoured a certain policy or opposed your plans, you had to take it seriously, even if you suspected manipulation. You ask the oracle of Amun whether you should campaign against the Hittites. The statue is carried by priests in a ceremonial procession. Questions are posed. The statue moves forward for yes, backward for no, or remains still for unclear answers. The priests interpret these movements. Conveniently, the oracle supports the policy favoured by the high priest, who controls the priests carrying the statue. You suspect manipulation but can't prove it, and contradicting the oracle publicly would undermine your own divine authority. Personal faith versus performance is a constant tension. Do you actually believe you're divine? Do you genuinely think the gods speak through you? Or are you just performing a role you were born into, saying the words and making the gestures because that's what's expected? The historical record suggests different pharaohs had different answers to these questions, but the performance was always required regardless of private belief. Some pharaohs seem to have been genuine believers, finding comfort and meaning in their divine role. Others appear more cynical, viewing the religious apparatus as a political tool. But even cynics had to perform devotion convincingly. Doubt or skepticism couldn't be revealed publicly. Whether you believed or not, the religious duties remained constant and demanding. You kneel alone in a private chapel, offering prayers to Amun. Are you talking to a real god or to a statue? You've performed these rituals thousands of times. You've said these words so often they've lost meaning. Do you believe? You're not sure anymore. Maybe you never really believed. Or maybe you did once and lost that faith under the weight of political manipulation and priestly corruption. Either way, tomorrow you'll perform the public rituals with perfect conviction, because that's what pharaohs do. The psychological toll of maintaining this divine performance is severe. You can never fully relax, never drop the mask, never admit doubt or uncertainty about religious matters. You're trapped in a role that requires absolute certainty and perfect performance, but you're human and therefore inherently imperfect. The cognitive dissonance must be maddening. You make mistakes in rituals, forget a line, perform a gesture incorrectly, miss a cue. Each mistake fills you with dread about potential consequences. Will the gods be angry? Will the priests notice and spread rumors about your incompetence? Will the people lose faith in your divine nature? The anxiety surrounding religious performance is constant and exhausting. During a crucial ceremony, you stumble over the words of an ancient hymn. It's a brief hesitation, quickly corrected, but you saw the high priest's eyes narrow. He noticed. Will he use this against you? Will he suggest to others that the gods are displeased with you? The paranoia combines with the genuine fear that maybe you have angered the gods, that your mistake might have cosmic consequences. You spend the night awake, anxiously reviewing your performance, castigating yourself for the error. Your death is even scripted by religious requirements. The way you die, the preservation of your body, the construction of your tomb, the funerary rituals, all of this is predetermined by religious tradition. You're expected to prepare for your death throughout your reign, overseeing the construction of your tomb and gathering the goods you'll need in the afterlife. Imagine spending decades preparing for your own death, knowing that your value to your society includes dying properly to maintain cosmic order. The tomb becomes a morbid obsession. You visit construction sites, make decisions about decoration and layout, commission funerary equipment. You're selecting the Shabti figures, magical servants for the afterlife, choosing canopic jars for your organs, planning the spells that will guide you through the underworld. It's like planning your own funeral for 30 years, constantly reminded of your mortality. Even as you perform divinity, you inspect your tomb chamber still, decades from completion. The walls are covered in texts from the Book of the Dead, spells that will help you navigate the underworld. The sarcophagus is being carved from granite. The canopic jars await your organs. Everything is prepared for your death, and you're only 40 years old. The contradiction is stark. You're planning for death while trying to live, preparing for the afterlife while dealing with very present threats. The psychological burden of this constant death awareness is profound. Chapter 5. Foreign Relations and the Never-Ending Wars. Egypt is rich, spectacularly, enviably rich. Gold from Nubia, grain from the Nile Delta, precious stones, exotic trade goods, skilled craftsmen, advanced technology for the time, and every neighbouring kingdom, tribal confederation, and nomadic group wants a piece of that wealth. Your job is to protect it, expand it, and project power while surrounded by threats on all sides. The geopolitical situation is complex and constantly shifting. To the south, you've got Nubia, sometimes conquered territory, sometimes independent kingdoms, always a source of gold and a potential military threat. The Nubians are skilled warriors with their own cultural traditions and aspirations for independence. They resent Egyptian domination and rebel when they perceive weakness. The relationship with Nubia oscillates between direct control and tributary status. When Egypt is strong, you extract gold, slaves, and exotic goods from Nubian territories. When Egypt weakens, Nubian kingdoms assert independence and might even threaten Egyptian territory. You need to maintain military presence in Nubia through fortresses and garrisons, but these require resources and can become vulnerable to attack or siege. The fortresses in Nubia are your first line of defense and control. These massive mud brick structures house Egyptian garrisons in hostile territory. The soldiers stationed there face constant danger, raids, sieges, disease, and the psychological toll of isolation. You receive reports of attacks on convoys, rebellions in mining settlements, and fortresses requesting reinforcement. Each incident requires a response. Send troops, punish rebellious populations, or risk appearing weak and inviting further attacks. To the northeast, the Levant is a patchwork of city-states, small kingdoms, and trade routes that you need to control or influence to maintain access to timber. Egypt has basically no trees suitable for construction, silver, copper, and other resources. The Levantine territories are culturally diverse, politically fragmented, and constantly forming and breaking alliances. Managing this region requires sophisticated diplomacy, backed by credible military threat. The city-states of Canaan, places like Megiddo, Hazor, Jerusalem, are nominally Egyptian vassals but constantly test the limits of their subordination. They withhold tribute, make unauthorized alliances, harbor fugitives. From Egyptian justice, you need to periodically campaign in the region to remind them of Egyptian power, but constant military intervention is expensive and drains resources needed elsewhere. A vassal king in Byblos sends tribute 6 months late with an apologetic letter claiming difficulties with harvest. Another vassal in Damascus makes an alliance with a neighboring city-state without requesting your permission. A third refuses to extradite a fugitive who fled from Egyptian justice. Each incident is a small challenge to your authority. Ignore them and you appear weak. Respond too harshly and you create resentment and potential rebellion. Finding the right balance requires constant attention and judgment. Beyond the Levant, you've got major powers that can challenge Egypt. The Hittite Empire, Mitanni, Babylon, Assyria, depending on which dynasty we're talking about. These aren't primitive tribes. They're sophisticated states with armies, bureaucracies, and ambitions of their own. Diplomacy with them is a high-stakes chess game where mistakes can lead to war, economic isolation, or vassalage. The Hittite Empire, centered in Anatolia, controls advanced ironworking technology and fields powerful armies. The Battle of Kadesh between Rameses II and the Hittite king Muwatalli II was one of the ancient world's largest chariot battles, involving thousands of chariots and tens of thousands of infantry. Neither side achieved decisive victory, leading to one of history's first recorded peace treaties. But the battle itself was brutal and could have ended Egypt's dominance if things had gone differently. You're trapped in a battle that's spiraling out of control. The initial engagement has expanded into a full-scale clash. Your intelligence about Hittite positions was wrong. They had more forces than expected, hidden and waiting. Your chariot divisions are committed and taking heavy losses. Retreat might turn into rout. Pushing forward might lead to complete destruction. You need to make tactical decisions in real time while bronze weapons crash around you and men die by the hundreds. This is the reality of being supreme military commander, making life or death calls with incomplete information under extreme stress. The diplomatic correspondence is exhausting. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence from one period, show the constant stream of messages between Egypt and other powers. Requests for gold, complaints about marriage arrangements, negotiations over tribute and trade, threats veiled in flowery language, demands for military assistance. Every letter requires a carefully crafted response that protects Egyptian interests while maintaining relationships. Reading and responding to diplomatic correspondence becomes a major time commitment. Vassal kings send flowery letters protesting their loyalty while requesting aid against neighbours or complaining about Egyptian officials. Great kings write as equals, negotiating marriages and trade agreements while subtly jockeying for advantage. You need to read between the lines, understand the subtext, craft responses that are diplomatically appropriate while protecting Egyptian interests. The king of Babylon writes, requesting gold as plentiful as dust for a temple construction project, reminding you of Egypt's vast wealth and implying that denying the request would be insulting to the gods. The Hittite king complains that Egyptian merchants are overcharging for grain, suggesting this might affect the fragile peace between your kingdoms. The king of Mitanni requests military assistance against Assyrian aggression, trying to draw you into a conflict that doesn't benefit Egypt. Each letter is a trap, a test, or a manipulation that requires careful response. Foreign princesses are sent to your harem as part of diplomatic arrangements. These women are essentially hostages dressed up as wives, guaranteeing their home kingdoms good behaviour. But they also maintain loyalty to their homelands, potentially spying for their fathers and brothers, creating mini-courts of foreign influence within your palace. You need to monitor them while not insulting their home kingdoms by treating them too suspiciously. A Mitanni princess arrives with a large entourage, servants, guards, advisors, all of whom are potential intelligence agents for her father's kingdom. She maintains correspondence with home, receives visitors, and hosts gatherings of other foreign wives. You try to balance giving her respect appropriate to her status with security concerns about what information she might be gathering or transmitting. You overhear your Mitanni wife speaking her native language with her attendants. You don't understand the words, but the tone seems furtive. Are they discussing the palace layout, Egyptian military strength, your health and habits, or are they just gossiping about palace life? You can't know, and that uncertainty is maddening. You consider placing Egyptian servants in her household to spy, but that might insult Mitanni and damage the alliance. Every decision has ramifications. Military campaigns are regular features of your reign. Egypt's security depends on maintaining buffer zones, keeping trade routes open, and periodically reminding neighbours of Egyptian power. This means leading armies into the Levant, Nubia, Libya, or wherever threats emerge. The logistics of ancient military campaigns are nightmarish. Organising thousands of soldiers, arranging supplies, coordinating chariot divisions, managing mercenaries and allied contingents. Planning a campaign requires months of preparation. You need to gather forces from throughout Egypt, stockpile weapons and equipment, arrange for food supplies to feed the army, organise transportation, often including ships for moving troops and supplies, and coordinate with intelligence networks to understand enemy positions and capabilities. The administrative complexity rivals managing the entire kingdom, because temporarily you're managing both the kingdom and a mobile military force. The quartermaster reports that feeding an army of 15,000 for a 3-month campaign requires approximately 4,500 tons of grain, stored and transported in thousands of jars. The The weaponsmith needs bronze for thousands of spearheads, arrowheads, and sword blades. The chariot workshops need to prepare hundreds of chariots and train thousands of horses. The physicians need medical supplies for treating wounded. The priests need materials for performing campaign rituals. Coordinating all of this while maintaining normal kingdom operations is overwhelming. The actual combat is terrifying, as I mentioned earlier, but there's more to it. Ancient battles could last all day, with hand-to-hand combat that leaves you physically and mentally exhausted. The heat, dust, noise, and chaos are overwhelming. Men dying around you, screaming, bleeding out, calling for help you can't provide. The smell of blood, sweat, and released bowels. The psychological trauma accumulates, but you can't show it because you're divine, and supposedly above such mortal weakness. The first time you see a man's skull split open by an axe, blood and brain matter spraying, his body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings, that image never leaves you. The first time you kill someone yourself, feeling the resistance as your blade enters flesh, watching the life fade from their eyes, that changes you fundamentally. You accumulate these traumatic experiences over multiple campaigns, carrying them with you but never able to discuss or process them properly. You're in close combat, and a young enemy soldier, he can't be more than 16, lunges at you with a spear. Your bodyguard intercepts him, driving a sword through his chest. The boy falls, clutching the wound, blood bubbling from his lips. He's crying for his mother. You watch him die slowly, this child soldier who had the misfortune to face Egyptian forces. You feel nothing in the moment. Battle requires emotional shutdown. But later, in quiet moments, you see his face. You hear him calling for his mother. The guilt and trauma accumulate with no outlet. Even when you win battles, the aftermath is brutal. Conquered cities might be sacked with all the violence that entails. You need to decide the fate of prisoners, enslavement, execution, or integration into Egyptian society. These aren't abstract decisions. They affect thousands of lives and set precedents for how Egypt treats defeated enemies. Show mercy, and you might be seen as weak. Show excessive cruelty, and you create martyrs and deepen enemy hatred. The treatment of prisoners is systematically harsh. Some are enslaved, sent to work in quarries, mines, or temple estates under brutal conditions. Others are executed publicly to demonstrate Egyptian power and discourage future resistance. Some are forcibly resettled in Egypt, torn from their homelands and integrated into Egyptian society at the bottom of the social hierarchy. You watch or order these things, knowing that you're inflicting suffering on defeated populations, justifying it as necessary for Egyptian security. After conquering a rebellious city, you order public executions of the leaders, impalement on stakes outside the city gates as a warning. You watch as men are lifted onto sharpened posts, their screams echoing. Their families watch, traumatized and terrorized. The surviving population is cowed into submission. You've established Egyptian authority through brutality. That night, you can't sleep, the screams echoing in your memory. But you tell yourself it was necessary, that this cruelty prevents future rebellion and saves lives in the long run. You're not sure you believe it. The military leadership is another political minefield. Successful generals gain prestige, wealth, and loyal troops, all things that could potentially threaten your rule. You need competent military commanders to defend and expand Egypt, but you also need to prevent them from becoming powerful enough to challenge you. Balancing military effectiveness with political control is a constant challenge. You promote a capable general after successful campaigns, rewarding him with land, gold, and titles. But now he has resources to build a power base. His troops are loyal to him personally because he led them to victory and shared the spoils. If he becomes ambitious, he has the means to challenge you. You need to keep him close enough to use his abilities, but watched carefully enough to prevent rebellion. Your best general achieves a stunning victory in Nubia, crushing a rebellion and securing gold mines. He returns to a hero's welcome. The troops chant his name. The nobles court his favor. You reward him publicly with honors and gold, but privately you're worried. He's popular, capable, and now wealthy. You assign loyal officers to his staff to monitor him. You give him responsibilities that keep him busy but limit his independent power. You balance reward with control, knowing that insulting or threatening him could provoke the very rebellion you're trying to prevent. Tribute and trade are double-edged swords. When Egypt is strong, tribute flows in from vassals and conquered territories. Gold, slaves, exotic goods, raw materials. This wealth funds your building projects, maintains your court, and demonstrates Egyptian power. But maintaining the military strength to extract tribute requires resources. If you weaken, the tribute stops, and former vassals rebel or ally with your enemies. The economics of empire are precarious. The tribute and trade goods you extract need to exceed the costs of military campaigns, fortress maintenance, and administrative oversight. When Egypt is expanding and victorious, the balance is positive. But any setbacks, defeated armies, successful rebellions, lost territories, can quickly make empire unprofitable. You're constantly calculating whether maintaining control over distant territories is worth the cost. Nubia sends tribute of 50 talents of gold this year, substantial wealth, but maintaining 3 fortresses and periodic military expeditions costs approximately 30 talents. The net benefit is 20 talents. If a rebellion requires a major campaign costing 40 talents to suppress, the region becomes a net loss. You consider whether to tighten control, more expensive but potentially more profitable, or loosen it, cheaper but risking loss of territory and resources. Neither option is clearly superior. Trade relationships are more stable but require careful management. Egyptian grain feeds much of the eastern Mediterranean during good years, giving you economic leverage, but you also depend on imported goods, timber from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, luxury items from across the known world. Disruptions to trade routes can cause shortages, economic problems, and political headaches. The Sea People's invasions during the Late Bronze Age collapse show what happens when the international system breaks down. Wave after wave of maritime raiders destroyed cities, toppled kingdoms, and disrupted trade networks across the Mediterranean. Egypt survived, but was weakened significantly. As Pharaoh during this period, you're desperately fighting to maintain order, while the world you knew collapses around you. The pressure is unimaginable. Reports come in of cities destroyed: Ugarit, Hattusa, Mycenae. These were major centers of civilization, now ashes and ruins. Refugees flood toward Egyptian borders. Traditional trade partners cease communication, presumably destroyed or overwhelmed. The trade networks that supplied timber, copper, and luxury goods collapse. You face shortages of critical materials while simultaneously defending borders against waves of desperate, displaced peoples. The entire world order is dissolving, and you're powerless to stop it. Border security is a constant concern. Egypt's borders aren't clearly defined lines on a map. They're fuzzy zones where Egyptian control gradually fades into independent or hostile territory. Desert tribes raid Egyptian settlements. Bedouins harry supply caravans. Pirates attack coastal trade. You need to maintain a network of fortresses, patrols, and rapid response forces to deal with these threats. The desert fortresses require constant supply and reinforcement. Garrisons posted there face harsh conditions, extreme temperatures, freezing at night, scorching by day, limited water, isolation, and constant threat of attack. Desertion is a problem. Morale is perpetually low. You need to rotate troops to prevent units from becoming ineffective, but that requires coordination and resources. The logistical challenge of maintaining border security is never ending. A fortress commander sends an urgent message. They're under siege by Libyan tribes. Water supplies are running low. The garrison can hold for perhaps 2 weeks. You need to organize a relief force, but troops are committed elsewhere. Do you abandon another position to relieve this fortress? Do you let it fall and punish the attackers later? Do you negotiate with the besiegers? Each option has consequences. You send a relief force stripping defences elsewhere, gambling that no other crisis will emerge in the meantime. The intelligence gathering required for effective foreign policy is substantial. You need spies in enemy courts, scouts monitoring troop movements, merchants reporting on economic conditions in foreign lands, interrogators extracting information from prisoners. This intelligence network requires resources to maintain and is only as good as the people running it, who might be feeding you false information for their own purposes. You receive intelligence reports that might be accurate, exaggerated, or completely false. Enemies plant disinformation. Your own spies might be doubled, feeding you what enemy intelligence wants you to hear. Merchants exaggerate threats to justify protection or trade concessions. Sorting truth from lies requires judgment and experience you might not have, especially early in your reign. 2 intelligence reports contradict each other. One claims the Hittites are massing forces for invasion. Another insists they're dealing with internal rebellion and pose no threat. Both sources have been reliable in the past. Do you mobilize forces, expensive and potentially provocative if the threat isn't real, or maintain normal posture, potentially catastrophic if invasion actually occurs? You make the best judgment you can with incomplete information, knowing that history will judge you by outcomes, not by the reasonableness of your decision-making process. Chapter 6. The body breaks down, or divine flesh is still just flesh. Here's a fun fact that'll completely destroy any romantic notions you have about being Pharaoh. Egyptian pharaohs suffered from the same diseases, disabilities, and physical decay as everyone else, despite their divine status. And for someone who's supposed to be a living god, being obviously sick or disabled created serious theological and political problems that made everything worse. The diseases we've identified in royal mummies are extensive and brutal. Malaria was common. Mosquitoes didn't care about divine blood. Tuberculosis attacked lungs indiscriminately. Schistosomiasis from the Nile's water caused chronic debilitation that slowly destroyed internal organs. Arthritis, exacerbated by the damp palace conditions and years of standing in ceremonial positions wearing heavy regalia, made movement progressively more painful. Dental abscesses caused by that stone-ground bread created constant facial pain and sometimes deadly infections that spread to the brain. We've got direct evidence from mummies. Rameses II, who lived into his 90s, showed severe dental disease, arthritis so bad his spine was partially fused, and hardening of the arteries. His final years must have been agonizing. Ahmose I had extensive dental problems, including multiple abscesses that would have caused constant pain. Siptah had a clubfoot from birth that would have caused a pronounced limp and made chariot warfare nearly impossible. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were chronic conditions causing daily pain and disability. But you can't show weakness. You're divine, perfect, eternally vigorous. How do you maintain that image when you're fighting off malaria, when your teeth are infected and throbbing with every heartbeat, when your joints are so arthritic you can barely stand for the multi-hour ceremonies you're required to perform? You grit through it. You hide the pain behind your ceremonial mask. You maintain the divine performance even when your mortal body is screaming in agony and betraying you at every turn. The malaria cycles are particularly difficult. You feel it coming, the fever starting to spike, the chills beginning, the profound weakness spreading through your limbs. But you have ceremonies to perform, audiences to grant, decisions to make that can't wait. You push through the fever and weakness, maintaining composure while every muscle aches. Your head feels like it's splitting open, and waves of nausea threaten to make you vomit in front of your court. When the acute phase passes, you're left weak and exhausted, but there's no time to recover properly before the next wave hits in a few days. You're performing a temple ceremony when the malaria fever spikes. Your vision blurs. Sweat pours down your face despite the cold shivers racking your body. Your hands shake as you make offerings. The priests are watching. Any sign of weakness will be noted, discussed, possibly interpreted as divine displeasure or loss of God power. You complete the 2-hour ceremony through sheer force of will, then collapse in your chambers where only your most trusted servants witness your suffering. Tomorrow, you'll perform again, regardless of how you feel. The medical treatments available are limited and often counterproductive. Egyptian medicine had some effective practices. Honey for wounds, actually a decent antiseptic, thanks to its antimicrobial properties. Willow bark for pain, contains compounds similar to aspirin, splinting broken bones. But they also believed in magical spells, amulets, and treatments that ranged from useless to actively harmful. Got a headache? They might drill a hole in your skull to release evil spirits causing the pain. Trepanation. Stomach problems? Here's a mixture of herbs, honey, and animal dung to ingest. Infection? Let's try some mouldy bread, which might actually work occasionally due to primitive antibiotics in the mould, or maybe some incantations to drive out the demon causing the illness. The physicians genuinely don't know which treatments work and which don't, because they have no framework for systematic testing or understanding of disease mechanisms. The trepanation is particularly horrifying when you're the patient. They use a bronze drill or scraper to bore through your skull bone while you're conscious, maybe slightly numbed with opium or alcohol, but not unconscious. The procedure is agonizing, despite whatever pain management they attempt. The sound of bronze scraping against bone reverberates through your skull. The pressure and pain are indescribable. The blood flows freely, and then the aftermath of having an open wound in your skull that could easily get infected and kill you slowly. Some pharaohs survive trepanation. We see healed trepanation holes in skulls, but many probably died from subsequent infections. You endure trepanation for chronic headaches. The physician assures you this will release the evil spirits causing your pain. You're held down. You can't be restrained. That would be undignified for a pharaoh. So you must hold still voluntarily. The drill bites into your skull. The pain is beyond anything you've experienced. You taste blood. You want to scream, but can't show that weakness. The procedure takes what feels like hours. Afterward, the wound is packed with herbs and bandaged. For weeks you live in terror of infection, checking obsessively for signs of fever or discharge that would indicate your imminent death. The physicians serving you are the best available, but that's relative. They don't understand germ theory, proper sterilization, or most disease mechanisms. They're working from texts and traditions passed down for centuries, some of which contain useful empirical observations. Honey does help wounds, much of which is magical thinking and pseudoscience. When you're sick, you're in their hands, and their hands aren't very capable of actually curing most conditions. Chronic conditions are particularly problematic. Acute illnesses you can hide during brief recovery periods, but arthritis, diabetes, yes, some mummies show evidence consistent with diabetes, and other chronic conditions are ongoing and progressively worsening. You need to continue performing your duties despite constant discomfort or pain. There are no sick days for pharaohs, no medical leave, no rest periods that don't come with political costs. The arthritis gets progressively worse over years. Your joints swell and stiffen, the inflammation visible even through your skin. Movement becomes painful, first mildly uncomfortable, then actively agonizing. Getting up from seated positions becomes difficult and eventually requires assistance. But you still need to perform long ceremonies requiring standing or kneeling for hours. You develop compensatory movements, trying to shift weight off painful joints, but this creates new problems and strains other parts of your body. You can barely rise from your throne without assistance by your 50s. Your knees are swollen and stiff. Your fingers are gnarled and can't fully close. But today you must perform a ceremony that requires kneeling on stone for an hour. Servants help you down, and the pain is immediate and severe. You maintain perfect composure, but inside you're in agony. The hour passes with excruciating slowness. When it's time to rise, you can't do it alone. The servants help, and you see the pity in their eyes. Pity for a god is a theological contradiction that undermines your entire position. Infectious diseases could spread rapidly through the palace. Close quarters, limited hygiene by modern standards, no understanding of disease transmission through germs. All these factors meant that when disease struck, it could devastate the royal household within days. Your children, wives, servants, and officials could all fall sick simultaneously. You might lose multiple family members to a single epidemic sweeping through the palace. An outbreak of some infectious disease sweeps through the palace. You watch helplessly as your children fall ill one by one. Some recover, others don't. There's no effective treatment, just supportive care, water, rest, prayers, and desperate offerings to the gods. You're expected to continue functioning, performing rituals, making decisions, maintaining order, while watching your family sicken and die, unable to do anything meaningful to help them. The helplessness is devastating, but you can't show that devastation publicly because you're supposed to be divine and above such mortal suffering. Your youngest son develops high fever. Within 2 days, he's convulsing. The physicians try every treatment, cooling baths, herbal remedies, magical incantations. Nothing works. On the 3rd day, he dies. You've lost children before. Infant mortality claimed several. But this one lived to age 7, developed a personality, showed promise. The grief is real and sharp, but you're Pharaoh, so your grief must be measured, ritualized, politically appropriate. You can't mourn as a father, only as a divine king acknowledging the loss of a potential heir. The psychological impact of chronic illness, while maintaining divine pretense, is severe and cumulative. You're in constant pain, you're frequently sick, you're afraid of the next medical crisis or the infection that might kill you, but you can't admit any of this publicly. You need to project strength and health while fighting desperate battles inside your own failing body. The cognitive dissonance and emotional strain are exhausting and never-ending. Mental illness was poorly understood and highly stigmatized in ways that made suffering worse. Depression, anxiety, paranoia, often justified paranoia given the constant assassination plots, trauma from violence you've witnessed or participated in. None of these have effective treatments or even proper recognition as legitimate medical conditions. The priest might interpret mental health struggles as demonic possession or divine punishment, making you even more reluctant to acknowledge symptoms. You experience what we'd now recognize as PTSD from accumulated battlefield trauma, recurring nightmares about violence you've seen and inflicted, hypervigilance even in supposedly safe spaces, emotional numbness alternating with overwhelming anxiety, difficulty sleeping. But there's no framework for understanding this as a medical condition requiring treatment. You're taught that divine nature should make you immune to such weakness. So, you suffer in silence, perhaps self-medicating with alcohol or other substances, carrying the psychological burden alone because admitting it would undermine your legitimacy as God King. The nightmares are relentless. You see the faces of men you've killed, hear their screams, watch them die again and again. You wake gasping, heart racing, certain someone is in the room. The guards outside your door hear nothing. You can't tell anyone about these nightmares because gods don't have nightmares. You begin dreading sleep, staying awake as long as possible, which makes you less effective at governance, but you can't explain why you're exhausted without revealing a weakness. Some pharaohs show evidence of genetic disorders from those consanguineous marriages I mentioned earlier. Akhenaten's unusual appearance in art, elongated skull, feminine hips, possible gynecomastia, might reflect actual physical abnormalities, possibly from genetic conditions like Marfan syndrome or other disorders caused by inbreeding. Tutankhamun had a clubfoot, cleft palate, spine curvature, and various other issues overwhelmingly likely to be related to his parents being full siblings. These genetic consequences of keeping bloodlines pure created real, serious suffering. Tutankhamun's clubfoot required specially constructed footwear and walking supports. We found over 100 walking sticks in his tomb, suggesting he needed them constantly. He couldn't walk normally, couldn't run, certainly couldn't fight effectively in chariot warfare, despite propaganda showing him as a mighty warrior. Yet he still needed to perform the role of warrior pharaoh in art and ceremony. The gap between his physical reality and the expected divine image must have been psychologically painful and politically dangerous. You watch as Tutankhamun attempts to perform a ceremony requiring him to walk a processional route. His limp is obvious, even with the special footwear and walking sticks. He's clearly in pain. The observers are sympathetic, but also concerned. A disabled pharaoh challenges the theological understanding of divine perfection. Some whisper that the gods are displeased, that his physical imperfection reflects spiritual failure. He's doing his best to fulfill impossible expectations with a body that fundamentally can't meet them. Disabilities had to be hidden or explained away through increasingly elaborate methods. A pharaoh with an obvious limp, visible deformity, or other disability challenged the image of divine perfection that legitimized the entire system. The propaganda machine worked overtime to present you as idealized and perfect, while the reality might be quite different. The gap between image and reality required constant, exhausting management. The aging process was particularly difficult because it contradicted core aspects of pharaonic theology. Egyptian art always showed pharaohs as young, vigorous, and perfect, regardless of actual age. But you're getting old, slower, weaker, more forgetful. Your memory isn't what it was. You forget names, lose track of conversations, struggle to recall rituals you've performed hundreds of times. Your hands shake. Your vision dims with cataracts. You're still expected to perform all your duties, lead armies, conduct lengthy rituals, manage complex administration. The contrast between your aging body and the timeless divine image becomes more pronounced and harder to maintain. You're in your 70s, and every movement is difficult. Your joints are stiff and painful from decades of arthritis. Your hearing is diminished to the point where advisors must repeat themselves. Your eyes are cloudy with cataracts, making reading difficult. You forget details that you would have recalled instantly in your youth, but you still need to perform ceremonies, grant audiences, make decisions affecting millions. You need assistance with basic tasks, but that assistance must be provided so discreetly that observers don't notice the God King's decline. Sexual dysfunction was probably common given the various health issues pharaohs faced. Arthritis making physical activity painful, vascular problems affecting blood flow, chronic diseases sapping energy, the psychological toll of constant stress. But you need to produce heirs. Multiple heirs, ideally, as insurance against the high infant mortality rate. The pressure to perform sexually, combined with whatever health issues you're dealing with, created another source of stress and potential political vulnerability if you couldn't father children. You're expected to visit your wives regularly to produce heirs, but your aging body isn't cooperating. The arthritis makes certain positions agonizing. The chronic fatigue leaves you without energy or desire. The stress and anxiety affect performance. Your wives are patient or not, depending on their personalities and political calculations. Failure to produce heirs becomes a crisis. Are you losing divine vitality? Are the gods withdrawing their favor? The personal humiliation combines with political vulnerability in toxic ways. End-of-life care was minimal by modern standards, offering little comfort in your final days. When you're dying, there's no meaningful pain management beyond basic herbs. Opium if you're lucky, but even that has limited effectiveness. No real understanding of how to make you comfortable or ease your passage. You're expected to die well, to maintain composure, make final pronouncements, ensure the succession is secure, perform divinity one last time, even as your body fails. Dying while maintaining divine dignity, possibly in severe pain, while everyone watches and judges your final performance. It's your ultimate test, and you can't afford to fail it. Your final days are agonizing. Whatever illness is killing you, infection, organ failure, cancer, we don't always know from mummies, causes pain and suffering that ancient medicine can barely touch. You're aware enough to know you're dying. Court officials and family members gather, watching, waiting like vultures for the inevitable. You need to remain composed, dictate final wishes, confirm the succession clearly to prevent civil war. Some pharaohs' last words are recorded, carefully crafted statements that maintain the divine image even at the end. Whether they reflect real final thoughts or are reconstructed by survivors to fit expectations is often unclear. You're dying, and the pain is constant and severe. The physicians have tried everything. Their remedies are useless against whatever is killing you. Your body is failing system by system, but even now, at the very end, you're performing. You dictate final instructions with your last strength. You name your successor clearly and publicly. You make offerings to the gods, or have them made on your behalf since you can no longer move. You maintain the divine performance until your final breath, because that's what pharaohs do. Then you die, and they begin the process of mummifying your body, trying to preserve your corpse for eternity. The ultimate expression of the contradiction between divine eternality and mortal decay. Chapter 7. When it all falls apart, or watching your world burn. Let's talk about the worst-case scenario that some pharaohs actually faced. When Egypt itself is falling apart around you, when the careful order you've maintained is collapsing, and there's nothing you can do to stop the inevitable slide into chaos. The intermediate periods in Egyptian history, times when central authority collapsed and Egypt fractured into competing kingdoms, show what happens when the pharaonic system fails catastrophically. Regional governors declared independence, foreign powers invaded, infrastructure decayed, trade networks collapsed, and the carefully maintained order dissolved into chaos. And somewhere in the middle of this civilizational collapse, there's a pharaoh trying desperately to hold things together with failing hands. The collapse often started slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Tax revenues declining as provincial governors kept more for themselves, claiming increased local expenses or reduced agricultural yields. Nobles growing more powerful and independent, building up their own military forces and making decisions without consulting the throne. The military's loyalty becoming questionable as generals gained power, and soldiers became more loyal to their commanders than to the pharaoh, trade disruptions causing economic problems that cascaded through the system. None of these individually seemed catastrophic, but together they eroded the foundations of pharaonic power until the whole structure became unstable. You notice the signs, but can't quite believe what they mean. A governor who used to send full tribute now sends 70%, with apologetic letters about crop failures. Another governor takes 3 months to respond to a direct order. A third ignores your command to send troops for a campaign, claiming they're needed for local security. Each incident could be explained away individually, but the pattern is clear. Your authority is weakening, and everyone knows it. Climate change could accelerate collapse in ways beyond any pharaoh's control. Extended droughts, changes in Nile flood patterns caused by shifts in rainfall far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands, desertification expanding the uninhabitable zones, environmental changes that affected agriculture undermined the entire economic base of Egyptian civilization. You could make all the right decisions politically and militarily, and it wouldn't matter if the Nile stopped flooding properly year after year. The Nile flood fails, not catastrophically, but year after year it's lower than normal. The agricultural yields decline. The grain reserves that buffer against famine are drawn down, then depleted. Hunger spreads through the population. You order emergency measures, redistribute temple stores, reduce palace consumption to show solidarity. But you can't make it rain in Ethiopia. You can't control the Nile. And the people, desperate and starving, begin to question whether their god-king has lost divine favour or was never truly divine at all. The psychological toll of presiding over decline must have been devastating beyond measure. You were raised believing you were a living god, destined to maintain Ma'at and continue Egypt's glory into eternity. Instead, you're watching everything crumble despite your best efforts. Provinces seceding, temples running independent policies, foreign enemies taking Egyptian territory, the economy contracting, people starving, the cognitive dissonance between what you were supposed to be and what you actually are must have been psychologically crushing. You perform the rituals exactly as taught. You make the offerings, recite the prayers, maintain Ma'at according to all traditional practices. But Egypt is still failing. The Nile still floods poorly. The enemies still advance. The treasury still empties. Either the gods aren't listening, or you're not actually divine, or the entire theological system that legitimizes your rule is false. Any of these conclusions is devastating. You continue performing the rituals because what else can you do? But your faith in the gods, in yourself, in the system, is shattered. Political fragmentation was often irreversible once it started gaining momentum. Local governors, nomarchs, established their own power bases, built up their own administrative systems and military forces, and stopped obeying central authority in any meaningful way. You could try to reassert control militarily, but that required resources and loyalty you might not have. Each failed attempt to force compliance made you look weaker and encouraged further defiance. You send troops to force a rebellious governor back into submission. The governor's forces meet yours in battle and win. Your troops were undermanned, poorly supplied, or simply less loyal than his forces who fight for a leader who pays and feeds them reliably. The defeat emboldens other governors. 3 more declare independence within a month. You no longer have the military capacity to respond to all of them. Your kingdom is fragmenting in real time, and you're powerless to stop it. Foreign invasions exploited Egyptian weakness with brutal efficiency. The Hyksos takeover of northern Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period showed how quickly a weakened Egypt could fall to outside forces with superior military technology. They had horse-drawn chariots before Egypt mastered the technology. As pharaoh during this collapse, you went from ruling a regional superpower to controlling a rump state in Upper Egypt, if you controlled anything at all. The humiliation and terror of watching foreign rulers conquer Egyptian territory, establish their own dynasties, and claim pharaonic titles must have been unbearable. And here's the thing that really gets me. They couldn't even complain. We have thousands of years of Egyptian texts, religious writings, administrative records, diplomatic correspondence, even some personal letters. But we don't have pharaohs honestly describing how much their job sucked, because admitting that would undermine the entire system. They had to maintain the performance until the end. So, yeah, you definitely wouldn't last a day as an Egyptian pharaoh. The physical demands alone would break most modern people. Add in the political intrigue, religious obligations, military dangers, and psychological pressure of maintaining a divine performance while being very human, and it becomes clear that this ultimate power was actually an ultimate burden. The next time you see those golden masks in a museum or watch a documentary about ancient Egypt's grandeur, remember, behind all that gold was a human being trapped in an impossible role, ground down by expectations, disease, and constant danger, performing divinity while fighting mortality. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why pharaonic power was actually a nightmare, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of historical realities that were way worse than Hollywood told you. And let me know in the comments what historical role you'd like us to debunk next. Until next time, appreciate your freedom to just be human, without the weight of cosmic order resting on your shoulders.